Hello everyone. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm just checking whether I'm audible or not. And please give me a thumbs up whether if I'm audible. I am so glad to be a part of this discussion. And आज we are having a part 2 of this discussion on renal physiology. And just let me tell you something about ourselves. Me and Shubhangi, me that is Jandeep Singh and Shubhangi Dhyani. We are two medical students. We are currently in our internship here. And we have this channel that is Caduceusly yours. You can find us at Instagram as well as we have a Telegram group as well. And हमारे जो basic initiative है through these is basically we want to wrap up physiology and all in about 10 days. And we are also like preparing for NEET PG examination, just like you guys might have started out as well. So whether you are in your second year or third year, fourth year, even first year, in fact, we are going over for renal physiology, and we've already had a discussion that is part one. You can check that out in our channel as well. So हमारा basic goal is that for physiology, I actually even consulted my previous physiology professor as well, and I asked him whether which book that we have to follow for renal physiology or like physiology for in general. So his answer was quite surprising that he wanted us to follow Gnong. Like I was a bit shaken by that fact because I thought that Guyton might be the only standard book that we are talking about here, especially for NEET PG examination. But that is not the case. In fact, uh, Guyton is a very good book, in fact, but most of the questions that we see in NEET PG examinations are mainly framed from Gnong. So all of the stuff that you find here is from Gnong, and I just hope I don't make an error in that. You can please feel free if I'm wrong about something. You can tell us in the comment section as well. Feel free to use the live chat as well for asking anything or wanting me to repeat or stuff. We can definitely do that. It's a very free discussion that we're going to have today. So we are almost 3 minutes past 10. So I think let's just wait for one more minute and then we can start. For everyone who has joined in, please, you can tell me whether you can hear me or not. We are having some problem with the app that I'm using today, that is Streamlabs. So I'm quite new to that app as well. All right. So a recapitulation for the previous session that we had on renal physiology. In that, we basically discussed something about the basic structure of a glomerulus and the basic components that it's made out of. And we also touched upon the different kind of nephrons that we have in the kidney. That is, we have the cortical nephrons and the juxtamedullary nephrons, and we saw the different functions of each of these nephrons as well. Then we moved on to discuss something about the juxtaglomerular apparatus, which we are going to touch upon very soon when we discuss about the autoregulation of the kidney. That was the last topic that we covered in our session. That was a 30-minute session. You can gladly watch that as well. And then we moved on to the arterial supply of the kidney. We saw the arterial supply. And we discussed something about the glomerular filtrate and how some of these solutes, like it depends upon the size, whether which size of the solute or the charge of the solute is the glomerular filtrate made out of. That will influence whether it can pass through the glomerular basement membrane or through the podocytes or not. And then we moved on to discuss something about the glomerular filtration rate and how it is dependent upon two big things. One is the Starling forces that we talked about. What are Starling forces? So these were forces that were trying to move water in or out of something, out of a capillary or out of a blood vessel or something like that. So we discussed about the four major Starling forces and how they can contribute in different pathological as well as physiological state to determine what is the current glomerular filtration of an individual. One thing was that. So what is the Starling forces? That is it gave us something known as the net filtration pressure that came out to be 10 millimeters of mercury. So we did the calculation that day. and we divide it by something known as a coefficient, capillary filtration coefficient. So Kf divided by the net filtration pressure, we got something known as the glomerular filtration rate. And then we calculated the GFR, that is the net filtration pressure multiplied by the capillary filtration coefficient, right? And now we are on to the autoregulation of GFR in renal blood flow. And the last topic that we did was the myogenic mechanism of autoregulation of kidney. So when we say autoregulation, we mean that organ is capable of intrinsically controlling its own dynamics. That is known as the autoregulation. So in the case of the kidney, the renal blood flow and the GFR, it remained relatively constant over an arterial pressure between 80 to 170 millimeters of mercury by a process which was known as autoregulation, right? And so whenever this pressure is there, that is 80 se leke 170 millimeters of mercury, the kidney is going to be like, I'm going to handle everything on my own. I don't need anything else to survive. So what mechanism, kya mechanism the uske paas? So basically one mechanism was the myogenic autoregulation of renal blood flow. As you all know, that smooth muscle cells are very special. How are they special, you might ask? They have these channels known as stretch activated calcium channels. So whenever the blood pressure is high, so the GFR is going to be high, we're going to lose so much of solutes. So we have to preserve the GFR. That is the main thing. We have to preserve the GFR without alteration in the renal blood flow. The renal blood flow is altering over some arterial pressure, and we want to regulate the resistances as well as the GFR. So how do we do that? So whenever jab bhi blood pressure high hai, the renal blood vessels, they're going to constrict, especially the afferent arterioles. Why, you might ask? Due to these smooth muscle cells. They have these stretch activated calcium channels. So whenever blood pressure is going to increase, they're going to constrict, and that is going to lead to a decrease in the GFR. Why? Due to an increase in the resistance of the afferent arteriole, right? And vice versa as well. So this was the myogenic mechanism of autoregulation. Next, we move on to the tubuloglomerular feedback, right? So that is the second thing that we're going to talk about today. And we've already talked about the different components of the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So let's recapitulate. First pay, we have the juxtaglomerular cells. They were known as the granular cells, also known as the modified smooth muscle cells. They were present at the level of the afferent arteriole. Good. The second component of the JJ apparatus was the extraglomerular mesangial cells. And what were they known as? They were known as the Lassus cells. Okay. And the third component, which is our most important component, that is going to be the macula densa. So now we're going to talk about the macula densa and how are these, in fact, the sensory cells. They are basically chemoreceptors. How they can see the amount of sodium that is present in the tubular lumen and make a judge कि भाई GFR का क्या करना है. So that is the job of the JJ apparatus, and that is the job of the macula densa itself, right? So let's just assume what's going to happen. So we have these two differences. What is going to happen whenever the blood pressure, whenever there's a decrease in the GFR, how do we maintain the GFR back to normal? And whenever there's an increase in GFR, how do we maintain the GFR back to normal? So let's just see that, and then we're going to see the mechanism behind it. Okay, so what's going to happen? So whenever we have a decrease in the GFR, right, come blood or come filtration ho raha hai through the glomerulus into the tubular lumen, what is going to happen? The first thing that's going to happen is sodium will be less in the tubular lumen. Come filter ho raha hai, to sodium kam aayega in the tubular lumen, right? So whenever there is less sodium in the distal convoluted tubule, what's going to happen? The macula densa senses it. I'm sure you might be following all of this up. Macula densa ne sense kar diya. Kaise sense kar diya? We'll be discussing it shortly. Sense kar liya. What is going to happen? Two things are going to happen. We're going to discuss the mechanism behind it. Just have some patience. First thing is vasodilatation of the afferent arteriole. Afferent arteriole, due to some mechanism, it undergoes vasodilatation, and we're going to have release of renin. This renin is going to what? Renin is a protease, so it's going to convert your angiotensin 1 into angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 1 gets converted via the ACE enzyme, which is present in the lungs endothelium, into angiotensin 2. And what is angiotensin 2? Angiotensin 2 is a very strong vasopressor. And the main thing is, angiotensin 2 has its receptors, 82 type of receptors, and they're GQ linked, matlab they're going to increase the calcium, and we talked about this. Jahan pe bhi calcium increase karega, we're going to have an increase in vasoconstriction. But these 82 type of receptors are more in the efferent arteriole. So what are we going to have? Efferent arteriole ka resistance will increase, right? So efferent arteriole, imagine this. Afferent arteriole is bringing more blood into the into the glomerulus and the efferent arteriole का आपने resistance बढ़ा दिया, what's going to happen? Backlog of blood is going to be in the glomerulus, and ultimately the GFR which was earlier falling, what's going to happen to that now? The GFR is going to increase. So that is the main thing. So this is the tubular-glomerular feedback. How does it happen? We discuss it. Now, moving on to what will happen whenever there's an increase in the GFR. तो क्या होगा? Opposite. Filtration ज़्यादा होगा, more sodium is going to be in the DCT. अगर sodium ज़्यादा होगा in the DCT, the macula densa again senses it. But now instead, what is going to happen is there's going to be vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole, and there's going to be release of adenosine. And this adenosine is the one which is leading to vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole. So अगर afferent arteriole के through ही blood अगर कम गया, so what, or you can say यहाँ पे जो PC था, that was the capillary hydrostatic pressure, glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure. Now, whenever the resistance inside a vessel is going to increase, which leads to the glomerulus, what is going to happen is this PC is going to fall. So whenever the one of the stalling forces which were contributing to filtration is going to fall, what are we going to see? GFR बढ़ा था. Now we're having some autoregulation. Why? जिसके through we are decreasing the GFR, and the GFR again returns back to normal. So this is the autoregulation. Now why this is happening? Let's just assume that, and let's just discuss that as well. So अभी we saw कि let's just assume a situation जहाँ पे we are seeing that the blood pressure is falling. Okay, so the blood pressure is falling. What's going to happen? Less amount of GFR is going to be there. कम filter होएगा, कम sodium in the lumen. That is what we see in the diagram as well. So sodium is less. Now where does the sodium go? The sodium goes into this junction. What is this junction? This is the junction between the thick ascending limb and the DCT. And what is these columnar cells? Very right, these are the macula densa cells. They are located at the junction of the thick ascending limb and the DCT. Okay, so the sodium is going to decrease, and we saw that यहाँ पे जो भी transport हो रहा है sodium का, that is secondary active transport. मतलब the thing is sodium is going to go inside the macula densa cells. Very true, but this gradient for sodium across the cell membrane is generated by this transporter which is present in every cell. What is that transporter? It's a primary active transport, but that is sodium potassium ATPase. Because all of this sodium influx is related to sodium potassium ATPase, that is why we call it a secondary active transport. मतलब जो transporter यहाँ पे है for sodium, that is not using ATP directly. It is using ATP via the sodium potassium ATPase, which is generating the concentration gradient जिसके through वो sodium is getting reabsorbed. Okay, so whenever the sodium is less, इसका काम कम पड़ेगा. Sodium potassium ATPase का work is not there. So sodium potassium ATPase goes to sleep. So whenever the sodium potassium ATPase goes to sleep, it's not going to convert ATP, break it down into adenosine, or break it down into ADP. So the adenosine is less. And what was adenosine doing? Adenosine was leading to vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole. अब यहाँ क्या होएगा? Very sorry guys, actually we got interrupted. The app is creating too much of problems. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about the यहाँ पे sodium is going less into the macula densa, and how the sodium potassium ATPase goes to sleep, right? So the sodium potassium ATPase is not going to convert this ATP into adenosine and ADP. So the adenosine levels are going to fall, and that's going to lead to decreased vasodilation of the afferent arteriole. So vasodilation of the afferent arteriole is going to decrease, and ultimately, what is opposite of vasodilation? We're going to have vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole. Fine. One thing is that. The second thing that we discussed yesterday in the previous session was that ADP and adenosine are less. So these ADP and adenosine, they have these receptors which are present on the JG cells, okay? Right? So we have the A1 receptors and we have the P2Y receptors for the ADP as well. So these receptors, they are calcium linked. And whenever these are calcium linked, what was the calcium paradox, my friends? Whenever these substrates, when they're available, abhi they're not available. When they were available, what they were doing, they were increasing the calcium in the renin. They were increasing calcium in the JG cells, and that will lead to decrease in renin secretion. Good. But abhi kya ho raha hai? There is decrease in adenosine and ADP. So there is no increase in calcium. So there is no increase in calcium in the JG cells. And what's going to happen? The calcium paradox, exactly. So the renin is going to increase now. And what is the renin going to do? The renin is going to kick back the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. We're going to have angiotensin 2. And where does it act? Preferentially, it's going to act at the efferent arteriole. So क्या हुआ यहाँ पे? So vasodilation of the afferent arteriole, vasoconstriction of the efferent arteriole, and that is why the GFR goes back to normal. Let's just discuss this as well. So what's happening? renal arterial pressure decrease हुआ. Could be anything, hypovolemia, shock, anything like that. Renal arterial pressure is going to decrease. Second thing, अब क्या होगा? GFR is going to decrease. GFR कम हो गया तो sodium कम गया. So there is decreased solutory absorption in the thicker ascending limb. There is decreased macular density in ACL, right? And what's going to happen? RAS activate हुआ था. We talked about the calcium paradox. And the second thing, decrease afferent arterial resistance. Why, my friends? Because adenosine is less. So this is the tubuloglomerular feedback that we were talking about. So this is the autoregulation of the kidney. Let's move forwards, right? So this is what we discussed, right? A very important table again. So we need to discuss ये resistances का क्या फर्क पड़ रहा है? How is this? समझ नहीं आ रहा है क्या हो रहा है? So let me just make it very easy for you. Do you remember this? What is this KF? KF was the capillary filtration coefficient. Okay? What was it dependent upon? It was dependent upon the permeability, and it was dependent on the membrane surface area जिसके through GFR was happening, and GFR हमें पता है capillary filtration times the net filtration pressure. Good. So कभी भी ये decrease हुआ due to any disease, any renal disease, diabetes mellitus, hypertension, whenever this KF is going to decrease, obviously the GFR is going to fall. Very true. Okay? What is this PB? PB was the hydrostatic pressure where in the Bowman space. And what was it doing? It was opposing filtration. So whenever this PB is going to increase, how you might ask? Urinary tract obstruction, most common cause. Okay? Kidney stones हुआ, urinary tract obstruction हुआ, already Bowman space में filtration जा रहा है. आपने वहां पे pressure increase कर दिया तो Starling forces are going to say, भाई, we don't have that much amount of, भाई नहीं कर सकते हम filtration, right? So the opposite going to happen, the GFR is going to fall. Very true. Now this is the main deal. This is the main deal. Okay, so what is going to happen? Whenever the resistance in the efferent arteriole falls, or let's just assume opposite. Whenever the resistance in the efferent arteriole increases, so what is going to happen? Efferent में से blood आ रहा है, efferent यहाँ पे vasoconstrict कर गया. What's going to happen? The PC here is going to increase because ये सारा का सारा backlog of blood is going to increase. And PC is one of those Starling forces which was promoting filtration. So what's going to happen? The GFR is increasing. Okay, the GFR is increasing, right? And the opposite going to happen whenever the resistance in the afferent arteriole is going to increase. What's going to happen? Resistance in the afferent arteriole is going to increase. The GFR is automatically going to fall. Okay. So this is a very important table. Just you can take a screenshot, or we have the whole of the PPT uploaded in a Telegram group channel as well. So let's just follow along it. Okay. So afferent arteriole constriction, GFR is going to fall. True. Efferent arteriole constriction, the GFR is going to increase. But do you see this? This is an asterisk mass, right? क्यों डाला है यहाँ पे? Because the main thing is, just read the statement. If constriction of the efferent arteriole is severe, more than threefold increase, the rise in the colloid osmotic pressure, right? Colloid osmotic pressure is going to increase efferent arteriole. Colloid osmotic pressure where? In the glomerulus, right? The rise in the colloid osmotic pressure exceeds the rise in the glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure. Now that complicates things. अब उल्टा होएगा. So what is going to happen? When this situation occurs, the net force for filtration actually decreases, causing a reduction in GFR. And that is the reason you might see very paradoxical कि यहाँ पे आपने तो बताया था कि resistance in the efferent arteriole increases, तो भाई हमारे जो है GFR is going to increase. Very true, यहाँ पे सही आ रहा है. But यहाँ पे this caution is going to be there. Okay, whenever it is severe enough, the GFR is going to fall, right? Whenever it is not that severe, the GFR is going to increase. So this is the main thing. And let's just move again. And the opposite is going to happen whenever the efferent arteriole undergoes dilation or the efferent arteriole undergoes dilation. Fine. Okay. So this again, that is here again. So what is happening? Whenever the efferent arteriole resistance decreases. So यहाँ पे resistance is decreasing. That is मतलब it is undergoing dilation. So we are having efferent arteriole dilation. GFR is going to fall. True. So whenever the afferent arteriole vasoconstriction होएगा, so what's going to happen? The GFR is again going to fall. Very true. And what here? यहाँ पे what is happening is कि afferent arteriole का vasoconstriction हो रहा है, right? So GFR vasoconstriction is happening, or we can say the resistance is increasing. What's going to happen? The GFR increases. True. Why? How is it mediated? Angiotensin 2 receptors. Very true. Okay. And obviously the opposite thing, afferent arteriole undergoes vasodilation, but the resistance का कम हो गया, तो जो GFR is going to increase as well. Okay. So let's move आगे. Okay, so now let's talk about renal clearance. Okay, so what is this renal clearance? Renal clearance is कितना amount of a substance is the volume of plasma which is cleared of some amount of substance by the kidneys per unit of volume. That is the clearance. कि whenever any substance is going through the kidney, whether it be creatinine or anything like that, or एक्सोजेनस कोई सब्सटेंस है, इनुलिन वगैरह, which we are going to discuss, GFR जिससे हम कैलकुलेट करेंगे, whenever that substance is passing through the kidney, right, कितना प्लाज्मा फिल्टर हो गया, कितना प्लाज्मा जो है उस सब्सटेंस के डिवॉइड हो गया, या उस सब्सटेंस जो है कितने प्लाज्मा में से उसे हटाया गया बाय द किडनी वाया यूरिनरी एक्सक्रीशन, दैट इज नोन एज रीनल क्लियरेंस. So clearance का formula is clearance is equal to urinary concentration of that substance UX into the urinary flow rate divided by the plasma concentration of the substance. Very important. All right. Or we can say concentration X in the plasma, that is Cx into Px is amount filtered and Ux into V is amount excreted. Okay, where Cx is the clearance of the substance times the plasma concentration, and the Ux is the urinary concentration times the urine flow rate. And that is how we get the formula that Cx is equal to U into V divided by P. What is U? Urinary concentration of that substance. What is V? The urinary flow rate. And what is P? The plasma concentration of that subject. So why is this plasma clearance so important? So what can we do with that? So basically दो चीजें कर सकते हैं हम इससे. We can calculate the amount of GFR and we can calculate the renal blood flow as well. Okay. So let's just see how do we calculate the GFR. What substance will we use to calculate GFR? Okay. So we need an exogenous substance that meets the following criteria. What is that following criteria? It should remain in the plasma. It should not enter the RBC or leak out into the interstitial fluid. है ना? जितना blood में है उतना ही रहना चाहिए. So it should remain in the plasma. Okay. It should not affect renal function. Nephrotoxic नहीं होना चाहिए. Okay. Third thing is freely filtered. It should not be metabolized by the kidney or any other organ. It should not be reabsorbed. It should not be secreted as well. We discussed three major functions of the kidney. या तो कुछ चीज उसमें से फिल्टर होगी, या तो वो कुछ सिक्रीट करेगा, या वो कुछ चीज रीअब्सॉर्ब करेगा. तो इसमें सिर्फ हमें फिल्ट्रेशन चाहिए, हमें चाहिए ग्लोमेरुलर फिल्ट्रेशन रेट. वी डोंट वांट द रीनल ब्लड फ्लो और द रीनल प्लाज्मा फ्लो और एनीथिंग लाइक दैट. हमें चाहिए कि कितना क्लियरेंस हो सकता है एक सब्सटेंस का, उससे हमें जीएफआर का एस्टिमेशन मिल जाएगा, राइट, कि इतना रिमूव कर सकती है किडनी, दैट इज द जीएफआर, राइट. तो it should be freely filtered and it should be easily measured in the plasma and the urine. Okay, so that's the main thing. And what is the gold standard? The inulin. It's a fructose polymer. Fructose का एक polymer है, that is inulin. It's an exogenous substance that we administer. इसके through we can measure the GFR, or we have the trustworthy creatinine, right? So this is the main thing. GFR, this is how we calculate it. Okay, we've talked about this. The concentration in the urine into the urine flow rate divided by the concentration in the plasma. And this is inulin. It is easily filtered. It cannot be reabsorbed, nor it is secreted by the nephron. Very two important criteria. It is not nephrotoxic, but it is non-endogenous. And this is the gold standard for measuring GFR. Okay. Creatinine. Creatinine is the main. The problem क्या है ना इसकी? Small quantity of creatinine is secreted in the proximal tubule. It is secreted. So you might expect यार GFR इससे ज़्यादा आ जाएगा. But एक problem एक और है. जितना measure करते हैं, that is also underestimated. You understand? हमने मेजर जो किया वो हमने अंडर एस्टिमेशन कर लिया, एंड हमने जो फिल्टर जो किया वो ज्यादा कर दिया. क्या हो गया? कैंसिल आउट हो गया, राइट. एंड क्लिनिक्स में तो हम यूज करते हैं दैट क्रिएटिनिन, वी यूज द कॉकरॉफ-गाल्ट इक्वेशन. अभी वी आर नॉट गोइंग टू डिस्कस दैट बिकॉज अभी हम फिजियोलॉजी पढ़ रहे हैं, राइट. सो दैट इज द मेन थिंग एंड वी यूज क्रिएटिनिन. सो राइट, बट प्रॉब्लम एक और है क्रिएटिनिन के साथ. व्हाट इज दैट? क्रिएटिनिन डिपेंड्स ऑन मसल मास. इट इज डिपेंडेंट ऑन मसल मास. तो ये एक प्रॉब्लम है. दैट इज व्हाई इनुलिन इज द गोल्ड स्टैंडर्ड, बेस्ट एवर. ठीक है. Okay, now we need to discuss how do we measure the renal blood flow. बात होगी GFR की, ठीक है. Inulin and creatinine. Renal plasma flow कैसे measure करें, renal blood flow कैसे measure करें? Very easy. We use something known as para-immunohippuric acid. क्या इसकी स्पेशलिटी है? Para-immunohippuric acid एक ऐसा सब्सटेंस है, बहुत easily filter out होता है. It filters out very easily. तो it's going to filter out, and very surprisingly पूरा का पूरा it gets secreted. So अगर मैं यहाँ पे अगर if I take in the veins का concentration ना, that is 0. Okay, तो सारा का सारा, तो इससे मुझे क्या मिलेगा? इससे मुझे ये मिलेगा कि कितना ब्लड गया थ्रू द किडनी. So that is the beauty of para-immunohippuric acid. Easily filtered, easily secreted, not reabsorbed, and that is what we need. इसके हमने अगर क्लियरेंस पता कर दी ना, इसका मतलब ये पता लग जाएगा हमें कितना रीनल प्लाज्मा फ्लो गया. ठीक है. बट प्रॉब्लम इसकी भी एक है, दैट इससे जो हम कैलकुलेट करते हैं ना, that is the whatever that we calculated the renal plasma flow, but there is something known as the effective renal plasma flow, ERPF. ये क्यों हमने किया? Because इसकी जो extraction ratio है ना, the extraction ratio for para-immunohippuric acid is 0.9. Okay, that is 0.9. तो जो actual renal plasma flow है, we'll have to consider that extraction ratio as well. So it will become the effective renal plasma flow divided by the extraction ratio of 0.9. Okay. And renal blood flow कैसे calculate करेंगे? RPF 1 minus hematocrit divided by 1 minus hematocrit. That's going to give us the renal blood flow as well. Okay. So pH clearance, we talked about this, and we talked about कि भाई इसका extraction ratio जो है that is 0.9, and that is something that we have to consider. Extraction ratio is 0.9. Okay. And we now know that the actual renal plasma flow that we calculate is effective renal plasma flow जो हमने calculate किया ऊपर divided by the extraction ratio that is 0.9. ठीक है? That's the main thing. Now we have something known as the renal threshold. Renal threshold क्या है कि क्या है ना, फॉर एग्जाम्पल कितना अमाउंट ऑफ सब्सटेंस ब्लड में होना चाहिए जिसके ऊपर अगर वो गया, मान लो एनीथिंग लाइक 180 के ऊपर जब भी वो प्लाज्मा में सब्सटेंस गया, इट्स गोइंग टू अपीयर इन द यूरिन, उसको हमने क्या कह दिया, दैट इज द रीनल थ्रेशोल्ड. सो व्हाट इज दैट? इट इज द कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ अ सब्सटेंस डिसॉल्व्ड इन ब्लड वेयर द किडनी बिगिंस टू रिमूव इट इनटू द यूरिन, right? So that is the renal threshold. But this is different from something known as TM, transport maximum. Transport maximum here is the maximal amount of a substance in mg which can be transported by tubules per minute. मतलब reabsorb कर सकते हैं हम उसे, secrete नहीं होने देंगे. That is the tubular transport maximum. और क्यों इंपॉर्टेंट है? सिर्फ ग्लूकोज के लिए. ग्लूकोज के लिए रीनल थ्रेशोल्ड और ट्यूबुलर ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम में एक डिफरेंस आ जाएगा, which we are going to see next. Okay. So now let's going to discuss the tubular function of the kidney. Okay, we have discussed the creatinine clearance, we have discussed about pH, we discussed about renal blood flow, renal plasma flow, सब हमने calculate कर लिया. Now we get into the physiological aspects mainly. So we have here, this is the PCT. We're going to see PCT में क्या क्या हो रहा है. Proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. So PCT में we have the main transporters. Everything is linked with sodium. Everything here is linked with sodium. And what do we reabsorb in the PCT? So here are the substances that we reabsorb in the PCT. What are they? Sodium, obviously. We're going to reabsorb chloride as well via the paracellular transport. Okay. We're going to reabsorb bicarb. We're going to see that very intricate mechanism. We're going to reabsorb water. We're going to reabsorb glucose. We're going to reabsorb amino acids. All of them are linked with sodium. So what is this? Sodium H positive exchanger. Okay. NHE. Okay. We have sodium glucose transporter. What is that known as? Sodium glucose link transporter, SGLT, 2 more than 1. So SGLT2 is in the kidneys. Okay. 1 is in the intestine. 2 more than 1. ऐसा नहीं है 1 नहीं है यहाँ पे. 1 is present in the DCD. PCT में क्या है और major क्या है? 2 more than 1. So if someone asks you SGLT, 2 more than 1. Okay. Sodium linked with amino acid transport and sodium linked with phosphate transport. डू यू रिमेंबर समथिंग? पीसीटी में कोई गड़बड़ होती थी जिसके थ्रू ये सब के सब अमीनो एसिड यूरिया होने लग जाता था, और वी कैन हैव बाइकार्बोनेट यूरिया, और वी कुड डेवलप योर अमीनो एसिड यूरिया और ग्लाइकोसूरिया. दैट इज फैंकोनी सिंड्रोम जिसमें पीसीडी चला गया था. ठीक है, दैट इज इन मेडिसिन दैट वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट कि फंक्शन ऑफ द पीसीडी डिस्टर्ब किस में होता है? फैंकोनी सिंड्रोम में. ओके, तो लेट्स जस्ट डिस्कस एच पॉजिटिव. ठीक है, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट. सो व्हाट्स गोइंग टू हैपन? सोडियम हमने रीअब्सॉर्ब कर रहे हैं. सो यहाँ से हमारा जो जीएफआर आया था इसने एक बफर को फिल्टर आउट कर दिया, दैट इज बाइकार्ब. ओके, बाइकार्ब इज इन द ल्यूमिन. दिस इज द ल्यूमिनल एस्पेक्ट एंड दिस इज द ब्लड वाला एस्पेक्ट, दैट इज द बेसोलैटरल एस्पेक्ट. तो हम इसे एपिकल पार्ट कहते हैं ऑफ द ट्यूबुलर सेल्स एंड इसे हम बेसोलैटरल पार्ट कहते हैं. ओके, ऑलराइट. सो जीएफआर आ रहा है. ओके, बाइकार्ब फिल्टर हो गया. डू वी नीड टू बाइकार्ब को छोड़ने थोड़े ना देंगे. बाइकार्ब वी नीड टू रीअब्सॉर्ब दैट बाइकार्ब. Okay, bicarb is very important. It's a very important buffer, right? It's a very important buffer. The main buffers that we have, right? We have bicarb. We might have the phosphate buffer, okay, H2PO4 minus and HPO4 minus 2. That is one buffer that we have, and this is one buffer that we have. We can't afford to lose it. Okay. So ये जो bicarb है, we need to reabsorb it, as well as we need to throw out the H positive as well. कैसे करेंगे? Okay. So bicarb is going to combine with H positive that is being thrown by the sodium H positive exchange. Combine हुआ, it forms H2CO3. ठीक है, कार्बोनिक एसिड. कार्बोनिक एसिड इज ब्रोकन डाउन बाय दिस एंजाइम कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेज. ओके, दिस एंजाइम कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेज इज टाइप 4. टाइप 4 यहाँ है, टाइप 2 इज इंटरसेलुलर. ओके, सो 2 यहाँ पे है, 4 यहाँ पे है. सो दिस कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेज टाइप 4 इज गोइंग टू क्लीव इट कार्बोनिक एसिड इनटू H2O and CO2. CO2 क्या है? इट्स अ, बिकॉज CO2 इज अ गैस एंड दिस इज लिपिड, गैस कैन ट्रांसपोर्ट टू द लिपिड. तो CO2 अंदर जाता है. CO2 again combines with the H2O, forms H2CO3, that is carbonic acid, gets cleaved by carbonic anhydrase type 2, forms H positive and bicarbonate. And what do we do with the bicarbonate? Bicarbonate reabsorb कर लिया. H positive का क्या करें? This H positive is necessary for two things. First, H positive बाहर excrete हो सकता है so that it can recapture the bicarb. And second of all, sodium gets reabsorbed. So it's a win-win situation. Bicarb आपने reabsorb कर दिया, H positive आपने excrete किया, but that H positive is only for conservation of bicarb. Okay, so a very important question. PCT के बाद does the pH of the tubular lumen change? No. जितना आपने H positive फेंका वो आप बाद में वापस reabsorb कर रहे हो. And one more line that is written in GoodNotes is जो ये mole है ना bicarb वाला, this is not the same mole that you reabsorb because new moles are getting created. ये जो हमने bicarb हमने लिया that gets converted into CO2. वो अंदर जाता है, that CO2 combines with some other molecule of water which is already present inside. So moles तो different हो गए. So this mole that is getting reabsorbed is different from this mole that is getting filtered. Okay, so this is all that is happening in the PCT. And obviously with the passive paracellular pathway जिसके through water reabsorption हो रहा है, right? As well as some other ions like chloride हो गया, calcium, magnesium, all of these are getting reabsorbed by the PCT. So let's sum it all up कि PCT में हो क्या रहा है. Okay. So this is sodium and glucose SGLT2. Very good. Sodium and amino acid coupled transporter. True. Sodium and phosphate, lactate, and other buffers as well. Sodium H positive exchanger, जिसे हमने कहते हैं NHE, especially type 3. Okay. Sodium potassium ATP is very important for secondary active transport. ये सारे के सारे are secondary active transport. Okay. Glucose is getting reabsorbed by GLUT2. It's getting reabsorbed by GLUT2. Yeah, GLUT2 is present on the basolateral membrane. You have amino acid transporters, phosphate, lactate, citrate, and bicarbonate and chloride का जो transporter, we know that as well. Anion exchanger जिसे हम कहते हैं. So what is happening in the PCT? Reabsorption क्या क्या हो रहा है PCT का? Water is getting reabsorbed कितना? 60%. Sodium is getting reabsorbed कितना? 60%. तो अगर ये दोनों reabsorb हो रहे हैं 60%, तो जो भी fluid is going to leave out of the PCT वो क्या होगा? Isoosmotic होगा. अगर वाटर ज्यादा रीअब्सॉर्ब हो जाता तो क्या हम कहते हैं उसे हाइपरस्मोटिक बन गया भाई. अगर सोडियम ज्यादा रीअब्सॉर्ब हो जाता तो हम कहते हैं उसे हाइपोस्मोटिक बन गया. इक्वल क्वांटिटी में दोनों रीअब्सॉर्ब हो गया तो क्या हुआ? आइसोस्मोटिक. तो आगे क्या बनेगा? आइसोस्मोटिक. 300 था 300 ही रहेगा. ठीक है. और यू टेक इट एट 285 मिलीऑस्मोल्स पर केजी, उतना ही रहेगा. ट्यूबुलर ल्यूमेन एंड प्लाज्मा का आइसोओस्मोलर होएगा एक दूसरे के रिस्पेक्ट में, आइसोटोनिक होएगा एक दूसरे के रिस्पेक्ट में. सो 60% ऑफ वाटर, 60% ऑफ सोडियम, 80 to 90% of bicarb, 100% of glucose and amino acid, very important, 60% of calcium, 15% of magnesium. Okay? So the pH of the fluid in the PCT will always be neutral, and the fluid in the PCT remains isotonic because दोनों के दोनों हमने reabsorb कर रहे हैं equally, right? सारे के सारे चाहे वो anions हो, cations हो और water, सबके सब 60% reabsorb हो रहे हैं, इस करके it remains isosmotic. Okay? And the next thing that we're going to see is the solvent drag. Okay, what is the solvent drag? Solvent drag is कि जब water moves along the tight junction, जो हम कह रहे हैं paracellular pathway, ठीक है, paracellular pathway, जब water move करेगा through these paracellular pathway, ये solute को भी ले जाएगा. So that solute को भी ले जाएगा, उसे हम कहते हैं solvent drag. मतलब solvent is dragging the solutes, ठीक है, that is known as solvent drag. Okay, now we talk about the glucose transport. ठीक है, अभी हमने देखा 100% of glucose should be reabsorbed. ठीक है, बट उसका भी कोई थ्रेशोल्ड होएगा ना. थ्रेशोल्ड क्या था? थ्रेशोल्ड था दैट अमाउंट ऑफ कंसंट्रेशन इन द प्लाज्मा जिसके ऊपर अगर वो गया, जिसके ऊपर मान लो सोडियम, फॉर एग्जांपल ग्लूकोज इट इज 180, अगर 180 mg% से ब्लड ग्लूकोज हुआ तो इट्स गोइंग टू अपीयर इन द यूरिन. उससे पहले एवरीथिंग इज गोइंग टू बी रीअब्सॉर्ब 100% बाय द पीसीटी. सो कितना फिल्टर्ड लोड कितना होगा? दैट इज द सीरम ग्लूकोज इनटू द जीएफआर एंड एवरीथिंग इज गेटिंग रीअब्सॉर्ब. 100% फिल्टर्ड ग्लूकोज इज रीअब्सॉर्ब. वेरी ट्रू. Via SGLT2 more than one. What is the type of transport? Secondary active transport. Renal glucose transport maximum कितना है? 375. ये उसकी कैपेसिटी है. ठीक है, पूरी किडनी की इतनी कैपेसिटी होनी चाहिए. दिस इज व्हाट आइडियल सिचुएशन में 375 तक mg per minute वो क्या कर सकता है? वो कैप्चर कर सकता है ग्लूकोज को. बट रीनल थ्रेशोल्ड कितना है? 180. इतना ज्यादा डिफरेंस. ठीक है, इतना ज्यादा डिफरेंस क्यों क्रिएट हुआ? और डिफरेंस को कहते क्या? वी कॉल इट एज रीनल स्प्ले. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन. रीनल स्प्ले. सो रीनल स्प्ले इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द एक्चुअल थ्रेशोल्ड और प्रेडिक्टेड वैल्यू, दैट इज द ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम. और क्यों हुआ रीनल स्प्ले? वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. एवरी नेफ्रॉन शोज हेट्रोजेनिटी. ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम हर नेफ्रॉन का डिफरेंट है. कोई नेफ्रॉन ऐसे इतना डिजीज है 70 mg per minute है उसका ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम. कईयों का 375 mg per minute है, कईयों का 175 mg per minute है. सबको मिला के जो आपको डिफरेंस मिल रहा है वो रीनल थ्रेशोल्ड है. और उसके बीच में वो ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम जो उसकी पूरी कैपेसिटी आइडियल सिचुएशन में उसे हम रीनल स्प्ले कहते हैं. ठीक है, सो दिस इज द आई मस्ट बी हैविंग द डायग्राम. आई विल शो यू लेटर ऑन कि रीनल स्प्ले का डायग्राम. ठीक है, लेट्स मूव फॉरवर्ड. नाउ वी हैव द लूप ऑफ हेनली. ओके, सो लूप ऑफ हेनली के दो पार्ट्स हैं. वी हैव द what do we have? We have the thin descending limb. So this is the thin descending limb. Okay. And what is this part? This is the thick ascending limb. Thick ascending limb, thin descending limb. Okay. Sometimes we have the thin ascending limb as well. किस नेफ्रॉन्स में प्रेजेंट होती है थिन असेंडिंग लिम्ब? मेनली जक्स्टामेडुलरी नेफ्रॉन्स में प्रेजेंट होती है, सॉरी कॉर्टिकल नेफ्रॉन्स में प्रेजेंट होती है थिन असेंडिंग लिम्ब. ओके, सो दो पार्ट्स हैं, थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब, थिन डिसेंडिंग लिम्ब. डिसेंडिंग लिम्ब का ऐसा क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है? ये वाटर परमिएबल है, मतलब वाटर इज गोइंग टू बी रीअब्सॉर्ब वाया दिस. सोल्यूट परमिएबल नहीं है. एंड व्हाट अबाउट द थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब? थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब इज द एग्जैक्ट ऑपोजिट. सोल्यूट परमिएबल बट वाटर इम्पर्मिएबल. वाटर impermeable. ठीक है, that is the main thing, and we are going to discuss the transporters एक एक करके. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss with the thin descending limb. नीचे आ रहा है PCT opens into the loop of Henle, thin descending limb. क्या हो रहा है यहाँ पे? there is a transporter aquaporin 1, very important. You have to remember the aquaporin. बहुत सारे types के हैं. Aquaporin 1 is very important. Aquaporin 1 thin descending limb में present है, reabsorb करेगा water from the lumen into its like tubular epithelial cells. So what is going to happen? क्या हम इस सेगमेंट को कॉन्सेंट्रेटिंग सेगमेंट कह सकते हैं? बिकॉज वाटर इसने ट्यूबुलर ल्यूमेन से खींच लिया, नाउ द यूरिन इज मोर कॉन्सेंट्रेटेड. ठीक है, सो इसे हम वी आल्सो कॉल इट एज अ कॉन्सेंट्रेटिंग सेगमेंट. इम्पर्मिएबल टू सोल्यूट्स, परमिएबल टू वाटर. एक्वापोरिन 1 के थ्रू इट्स गोइंग टू कैप्चर द वाटर. ठीक है, सो दैट इज द थिन डिसेंडिंग लिम्ब. व्हाट अबाउट द थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब? थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब एग्जैक्ट ऑपोजिट. सोल्यूट परमिएबल है, वाटर इम्पर्मिएबल है. तो कौन कौन से सोल्यूट्स को ये परमिएबल कराएगा, कौन कौन से सोल्यूट्स को कैप्चर करेगा? सोडियम, पोटेशियम, 2 क्लोराइड. इस करके वी कॉल दिस चैनल एज NKCC due to 2 chloride. NKCC2. NKCC2 भी कह सकते हैं, सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड सिम्पोर्टर भी कह सकते हैं. So this is the NKCC2 transporter. Do you remember any drug which inhibits this? Yeah, that is furosemide. Lasix, furosemide inhibits this, and that is why it functions as a loop diuretic, जिसे हम कहते हैं, because it acts at the loop. thick ascending limb पे act करते हो. ठीक है, so this also is known as the diluting segment. So all in all, loop of Henle कर क्या रहा है? रीअब्जॉर्प्शन करा रहा है वो 15% सोडियम का. 15 इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, सब कुछ 15%. ओके, हर चीज का 15%. 15% ऑफ पोटेशियम, क्लोराइड, वाटर, कैल्शियम, मैग्नीशियम. दैट वाज 60%. ठीक है, 60% वाज पीसीटी. 60% ऑफ सोडियम, 60% ऑफ क्लोराइड, 60% ऑफ वाटर वगैरह वगैरह. ठीक है, ऑल ऑफ दिस इज हैपनिंग. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन, नीट एग्जामिनेशन का एक प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चन है. व्हाट वाज दैट क्वेश्चन यू माइट आस्क? ओके, सो NKCC2 सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड को कर रहा है, वेरी ट्रू. And there is a channel known as ROMK channel, okay? Renal outer medullary potassium channel. ठीक है, इसका एक और भाई है, that is big potassium channel, big BK channel, okay? These two channels are throwing potassium outside, मतलब tubular secretion करा रहे हैं पोटेशियम का into the lumen. क्यों भाई? आप पोटेशियम रीअब्सॉर्ब कर रहे हो, पोटेशियम फेंक रहे हो, एंड इट क्या इसका लॉजिक क्या है? बेसिकली लॉजिक बहुत सिंपल है एंड वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट लॉजिक एज वेल. ये जो पोटेशियम जो बाहर फेंक रहे हैं ना, दिस इज गोइंग टू इंक्रीज द positive potential of the tubular lumen. So the tubular lumen यहाँ पे it becomes almost 15 millivolts positive. Why? ये 15 millivolts positive किस चार्ज को रिपेल करेगा? Positive is going to repel the positive. So calcium is going to get repelled. Calcium and magnesium. So calcium and magnesium is getting repelled and getting reabsorbed by the paracellular transport, and that is what is written. Question क्या था पता है? Question was which ion is responsible for the paracellular transport or for the transport of calcium and magnesium, reabsorption of calcium and magnesium. What is that ion? The ion was potassium. Renal outer medullary potassium channels and BK channels के through जो potassium हमने into the tubular lumen फेंका है, that is going to increase the membrane potential of the tubular lumen. उसके through positive charges are going to get repelled and paracellular pathway के through calcium and magnesium is getting reabsorbed. Okay, so clinical question. एक सिंड्रोम है नोन एज बार्टर सिंड्रोम. वी आर नॉट गोइंग टू डिस्कस द डिटेल अबाउट इट, बट मेन थिंग जो याद रख लो, थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब में जो प्रॉब्लम है दैट इज बार्टर सिंड्रोम. ठीक है, एंड व्हाट वाज द ड्रग दैट वाज एक्टिंग ऑन द थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब? लूप डायरेटिक. सारे फीचर्स आर गोइंग टू बी, एक का साइड इफेक्ट इज गोइंग टू बिकम द क्लिनिकल फीचर्स ऑफ बार्टर. ठीक है, सो बार्टर में प्रॉब्लम क्या है? या तो NKCC2 में ट्रांसपोर्टर में म्यूटेशन हो गई, या ROMK में म्यूटेशन हो गई, या देयर इज दिस बार्टन चैनल, इट्स अ क्लोराइड चैनल, एक सब यूनिट है बार्टन चैनल क्लोराइड चैनल की, और पूरा का पूरा क्लोराइड चैनल भी डिसफंक्शन हो सकता है, दैट इज क्लोराइड चैनल KB. ओके, सो दीज आर डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ बार्टर सिंड्रोम. एंड इसके थ्रू क्या क्या होगा? ऑब्वियसली वी आर गोइंग टू हैव सोडियम लॉस, तो हाइपोनेट्रीमिया होगा, वाटर लॉस होगा, डायूरेसिस होगा, राइट? ठीक है, सो ऑल ऑफ दिस इज गोइंग टू बी हैपनिंग इन बार्टर सिंड्रोम. वी आर गोइंग नॉट गोइंग टू डिस्कस इनटू द डिटेल्स ऑफ इट. ओके, ऑलराइट. So let's move on to loop of Henle हो गया. Now we're moving on to the vasa recta. Okay, vasa recta क्या है ये? vasa recta is a counter current exchanger. मतलब एक इसकी लिम नीचे की तरफ फ्लो कर रही है, एक इसकी लिम ऊपर की तरफ फ्लो कर रही है. वेरी मिरर इमेजेस ऑफ लूप ऑफ हेनले. एक इशू क्या है? रिवर्स्ड है सॉर्ट ऑफ. मतलब कि मान लो थिन डिसेंडिंग लिम है ऑफ द लूप ऑफ हेनले. व्हाट इज इट परमिएबल फॉर? इट इज परमिएबल फॉर वाटर एंड इट इज इम्पर्मिएबल टू सोल्यूट्स. वाटर के लिए परमिएबल है, इम्पर्मिएबल फॉर सोल्यूट्स. ठीक है. दिस एक्चुअली द डायग्राम व्हिच आई ड्रॉन इज नॉट गिवन इन टेक्स्ट बुक्स. ये थोड़ा डायग्राम भी थोड़ा सा ठीक नहीं है. तो थिन डिसेंडिंग लिम जो है ना, इट इज कपल्ड with the ascending limb of the vasa recta and the thick ascending limb is coupled with the descending limb of the vasa recta. तो यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है? It is functioning as counter current exchange. अभी we are going to discuss counter current multiplier. उसके थ्रू what we'll discuss कि ये भाई इतना रीनल इंटरस्टिशियम में हम कहते हैं कि उस मोलारिटी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है 1200 मिलीऑस्मोल्स पर केजी. कैसे जनरेट हुआ? कौन जनरेट करेगा? दैट इज काउंटर करंट मल्टीप्लिकेशन. जनरेट कर दिया, उसे मेंटेन कौन करेगा? दैट इज द जॉब ऑफ द वासा रेक्टा. कैसे मेंटेन करेगा? ये जो सारे सोल्यूट्स हैं इन्हें वॉश डाउन करने नहीं देगा. मतलब कहीं से भी अगर वो जा रहे हैं उन्हें वापस के वापस इंटरस्टिशियम में डाल देगा. कहीं से लेगा, कहीं से देगा. ओके, तो यही प्रॉब्लम हो रही है, यही इसकी ब्यूटी है. दैट इज कि अगर ये थिन डिसेंडिंग लिम वाटर परमिएबल है ना, तो जो वाटर परमिएबल जो इंटरस्टिशियम में जा रहा है दैट इज गेटिंग एक्सेप्टेड बाय द सेंडिंग लिम. ठीक है. एंड व्हाट इज गोइंग टू हैपन, जो यहाँ पे जो सोल्यूट इज गेटिंग रीअब्सॉर्ब बाय द इंटरस्टिशियम, that is going to get funneled into where? It's going to funnel into the descending limb. The thick ascending limb is reciprocal to the descending limb of the vasa recta and the thin descending limb to the ascending limb of the vasa recta. दोनों के दोनों एक दूसरे के opposites हैं. अगर thin descending limb water reabsorption कर रहा है तो ascending limb of the vasa recta is accepting that water and letting go of the solutes, which is what it is doing here. ठीक है. और ये जो solutes हैं ये कहाँ जाएंगे? into the interstitium. ठीक है. And opposite is happening for the thick ascending limb. अगर वो solutes को capture कर रहा है thick ascending limb, तो solutes कहाँ जाएंगे? into the vasa recta. Which limb? In the ascending limb of the vasa, into the descending limb of the vasa recta. ये सारे के सारे solutes को ये capture कर लेगा और water को बाहर फेंक देगा. So that is the main thing of the vasa recta. So counter current multiplier जो है वो thick ascending limb है, that is loop of Henle, and counter current exchanger is the vasa recta. Now the main thing is ये सारे physiological aspects जो है ना, they're not that important for NEET PG examination. आता क्वेश्चन यही है, which is the counter current multiplier, which is the counter current exchanger. ठीक है. The diagrams that we used to make कि how does this counter current multiplication is going to work, right? वो यहाँ पे useless है. That is all conceptual models. That is not what happens. Okay. वो we are going to discuss that as well if time permits. Okay. So हमने PCD डिस्कस कर दिया, loop of Henle डिस्कस कर दिया, vasa recta डिस्कस कर दिया. अब हम आगे DCT. Okay. तो DCT, what's going to happen in the DCT? DCT में ट्रांसपोर्टर है सोडियम क्लोराइड सिम्पोटर. ओके, सोडियम अंदर जा रहा है, क्लोराइड अंदर जा रहा है, एंड अगेन सोडियम क्लोराइड सिम्पोर्टर है यहाँ पे. ओके, व्हाट अदर चैनल्स आर देयर? देयर इज अ कैल्शियम चैनल है यहाँ पे, TRPV5. व्हाट इज दिस? ट्रांजिएंट रिसेप्टर पोटेंशियल वैनिलॉइड रिसेप्टर टाइप 5. ओके, सो ट्रांजिएंट रिसेप्टर पोटेंशियल वैनिलॉइड. ठीक है, वैनिलॉइड टाइप 5, TRPV5 यहाँ पे ट्रांसपोर्टर है फॉर योर कैल्शियम. कैल्शियम रिअब्सॉर्प्शन भी हो रहा है डीसीटी में. ठीक है भाई. एंड TRPM6, M फॉर मैग्नीशियम, तो मैग्नीशियम ट्रांसपोर्ट भी यहाँ पे हो रहा है. ओके, सो कैल्शियम एंड मैग्नीशियम रिअब्सॉर्प्शन इज आल्सो ऑकरिंग, बट यहाँ पे क्या है? ट्रांससेलुलर पाथवे. पैरासेलुलर पाथवे कहाँ था? लूप ऑफ हेनले में था. वहाँ पे कोई ट्रांसपोर्टर नहीं था कैल्शियम एंड मैग्नीशियम के लिए. ट्यूबुलर ल्यूमेन की पॉजिटिव पोटेंशियल से हम उसे कैप्चर कर रहे थे. ठीक है, पर यहाँ पे ट्रांसपोर्टर है, TRPM6 है यहाँ पे, TRPV5 है यहाँ पे, कैल्शियम एंड मैग्नीशियम को रिअब्सॉर्ब कर रहे हैं. ओके, अब वहां पे लूप ऑफ हेनले में, थिक असेंडिंग लिम्ब में भी डिस्कस एक ड्रग दैट इज लूप डायरेटिक्स वहां पे वर्क कर रहे थे. यहाँ पे क्या वर्क करेंगे? थाइजाइड डायरेटिक्स. ठीक है, मैंने वहां पे कहा था कि लूप डायरेटिक की जैसे एक पैथोलॉजिकल कंडीशन है जिसे हम कहते हैं बार्टर सिंड्रोम, यहाँ पे क्या होगी? गिटलमैन सिंड्रोम. एग्जैक्ट सेम फीचर्स, एक के साइड इफेक्ट्स आर बिकमिंग द क्लिनिकल फीचर्स ऑफ द अदर. ओके, व्हाट एल्स इज हैपनिंग? यहाँ पे जो कैल्शियम रीअब्सॉर्प्शन हो रहा है ना, व्हाट इज दैट फैसिलिटेटेड बाय? इट इज फैसिलिटेटेड बाय द पैराथायराइड हार्मोन. ओके, पैराथायराइड हार्मोन एज यू ऑल नो क्या करता है बेसिकली? Parathyroid hormone is basically is going to increase the calcium and magnesium absorption from the GIT as well through vitamin D. ठीक है, calcibindin सुना होगा वगैरह. And it's also going to increase the calcium and magnesium reabsorption. मतलब tubular secretion जो है calcium and magnesium को उसे inhibit करता है. ठीक है, वो कैसे करेगा? Via this pathway कि ये TRPV5 and TRPM6 को stimulate करेगा, तो सारा का सारा जो calcium and magnesium in the tubular lumen वो capture हो गया वापस. ठीक है, and very important MCQ as well, 75% of magnesium reabsorption. very big amount. 15% PCT, 15% in the loop of Henle. DCT में मैग्नीशियम का मैक्सिमम रीअब्जॉर्प्शन होता है. इट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन. DCT का मैक्सिमम रीअब्जॉर्प्शन आप ओके. सो व्हाट दिस इज सिंड्रोम, व्हाट इज द सिंड्रोम? गिटलमैन सिंड्रोम. यहाँ पे क्या ट्रांसपोर्टर है? सोडियम क्लोराइड का लॉस ऑफ फंक्शन म्यूटेशन है भाई. So it's going to behave exactly as if the person is on thiazide diuretics with the same amount of features, hyponatremia. All right, again, so sorry for that. Let's continue. So next we move on to the collecting duct. Okay, collecting duct में we have discussed everything, the rest of the portion. Collecting duct में दो type की cells हैं, with the principal cells and with the intercalated cells. Let's discuss them एक एक करके. So let's discuss principal cells. What are the principal cells going to do? क्या क्या है इनके पास? They have something known as the ENaC channel. This stands for epithelial sodium channel, ENaC. Okay, this ENaC is going to reabsorb sodium. ठीक है. And what are the other channels? We have potassium secretion के थोड़े channels. They are ROMK and BK. हमने already पढ़ा renal outer medullary potassium channels and the big potassium channel. They are also known as maxi potassium channels. So दो यहाँ पे potassium channels हैं, एक यहाँ पे sodium channel है. Okay. Now the funny thing is, just remember, this is going to be very important for pharmacology as well. वहाँ पे हम पढ़ते हैं that we are having hyponatremia, sodium loss हो रहा है, and we study hypoglycemia as a side effect of thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics. And if someone asks you क्यों हो रहा है, we don't have any clue, and even I didn't have any clue कि क्यों हो रहा है. So main thing यही से रिलेशन है. तो this is very important. Principal cells पे सब कुछ हो रहा है. क्या हो रहा है? जब सोडियम अंदर आएगा ना through the ENaC channel, it's going to increase the membrane potential here as well, and that is going to facilitate potassium secretion via the ROMK and the BK channel. It's as simple as that. ठीक है. So whenever we have sodium loss, sodium is getting lost in the urine due to any diuretic like thiazide diuretics, like it could be a thiazide diuretic or it could be a loop diuretic. क्या होएगा? सोडियम लॉस हो रहा है. सोडियम लॉस ओके. तो जब सोडियम इंक्रीज करेगा यहाँ पे एंड ल्यूमिनल पोटेंशियल अगर इंक्रीज करेगा तो पोटेशियम इज गेटिंग एक्सक्रीटेड. वही रीजन था कि जब whenever we have a diuretic and whenever we have sodium loss, RAS is going to get stimulated and it's going to activate a friend that is ENaC. वो ENaC के थ्रू जितना सोडियम रीअब्सॉर्ब करोगे उतना आप ल्यूमिनल पोटेंशियल इंक्रीज करोगे एंड उतना पोटेशियम बाहर फेंकोगे. And that is the reason why hypokalemia was a side effect of loop diuretics and thiazide diuretics. There is one more reason which we are going to discuss as well. That is also very important reason as well. पर ये एक reason है यहाँ पे. तो ENaC कर लिया, ROMK and BK channels हो गया. And what about the water? Water is going to get reabsorbed via aquaporin. Which one? 2. Very important. Aquaporin 2 gets directly stimulated by ADH. That is antidiuretic hormone released from the posterior pituitary by the superior supraoptic glands. You know that, है ना? Supraoptic glands say all of these neurons. Supraoptic nuclei is a nuclei in the hypothalamus, in the anterior portion of the hypothalamus. ठीक है. वहां से these nuclei are going to secrete the peptide directly into the posterior pituitary. That is ADH. ठीक है. And this ADH is going to stimulate this aquaporin 2 and इसके through हमने water को reabsorb कर लिया. ठीक है. So this is the thing. Principal cells में and aldosterone का रोल हमने क्या पढ़ा? ENaC को स्टिमुलेट करता है तो सोडियम रीअब्सॉर्प्शन इंक्रीज करता है, एंड ROMK को स्टिमुलेट करेगा तो ये पोटेशियम सिक्रीशन को भी स्टिमुलेट करेगा. दैट इज द रीजन व्हाई whenever we get an adrenocortical tumor like Conn syndrome, है ना, adrenocortical adenoma. So whenever that releases aldosterone, what do we get? Hyponatremia and hypokalemia. Oh, sorry, hyponatremia and hypokalemia, right? Sodium ज़्यादा reabsorb करते हैं due to aldosterone and potassium secretion करते हैं due to aldosterone itself. Okay. So this is the same thing. यहाँ पे what I've shown is कि how does aldosterone work? Okay. Aldosterone, it's a steroid. So steroid के क्या कौन से receptors होते हैं? We have nuclear and cytoplasmic receptors. तो यहाँ पे भी यही हो रहा है. Aldosterone is here. It's going to work on its mineralocorticoid receptor, that is MR, and this mineralocorticoid receptor, that is MR, gets internalized into the nucleus. It releases something known as aldosterone inducible proteins, AIP. और उसमें से दो जो हमें यहाँ पे याद रखने हैं, that is एक तो हो गया हमारा ENaC and एक हो गया हमारा what? That is your ROMK. You can even add your sodium potassium ATPase. तीनों के तीनों are aldosterone inducible proteins. ठीक है. ENaC को हम कैसे इनहिबिट कर सकते हैं? ENaC को हम इनहिबिट कर सकते हैं via ENaC inhibitors, जिसे हम पोटेशियम स्पेरिंग डायूरेटिक्स कहते हैं. दो एग्जांपल्स, अमीलियोराइड एंड योर ट्राइमटरन. ठीक है, अमीलियोराइड एंड ट्राइमटरन. ठीक है. एंड aldosterone को हम कैसे इनहिबिट करते हैं? via spironolactone. वन मोर एग्जांपल, एप्लेरेनोन. ठीक है, एप्लेरेनोन एंड spironolactone. बोथ आर व्हिच काइंड ऑफ ड्रग्स? पोटेशियम स्पेरिंग ड्रग्स. ठीक है, क्योंकि हाइपोग्लीमिया नहीं करेंगे. ठीक है. सो दैट इज द मेन थिंग. एंड व्हाट इज दिस एक्शन, यहाँ पे भी हमने पढ़ा कि प्रिंसिपल सेल्स में एक और है दैट इज एक्वापोरिन 2 है, ठीक है। कौन वर्क करते हैं यहाँ पे, एडीएच, एंटी डायरेटिक हार्मोन इज अ पेप्टाइड, so it is going to have a what, it's not going to have a nuclear or cytoplasmic receptor, it's going to have a cell membrane receptor, and यहाँ पे कौन सा V2 receptor, किससे लिंक्ड है वो, GS से, that is G protein, that is stimulatory type, क्या करेगा वो, it's going to stimulate this enzyme known as adenyl cyclase, increase the amount of cyclic AMP, this cyclic AMP is going to activate this protein kinase A, it's a kinase, तो ये क्या करेगा, फॉस्फोराइलेट करेगा किसी चीज को, किससे, प्रोटीन्स को फॉस्फोराइलेट करेगा, and one of those proteins is aquaporin, and once these proteins are phosphorylated, they get inserted into the apical membrane and they're going to lead to sodium reabsorption. That is the work of ADH. Okay, clinical portion, abhi humne we discussed about Gittelman, and second one, that is we discussed about the Bartter syndrome. एक और आ गया यहाँ पे, that is Liddle syndrome. What do we have whenever we have a gain of function of ENaC? तो अगर ENaC, this is the, where is the ENaC, right, so this is the ENaC का gain of function हो गया, so it's going to happen, सोडियम बहुत ज़्यादा रीअब्सॉर्ब होने लग जाएगा, तो सोडियम जहाँ पे ज़्यादा है वहाँ पे भी सोडियम सॉल्ट है, तो वी गोइंग टू हैव हाइपरटेंशन, ठीक है, तो वन थिंग इज हाइपरटेंशन, बट सोडियम इज गोइंग टू इनहिबिट द RAS axis as well, तो aldosterone is going to be low, तो दिस इज पैराडॉक्सिकल ना, कि सारे फीचर्स एल्डोस्टेरोनिज्म के मिल रहे हैं पर एल्डोस्टेरोन इज लो, दैट इज व्हाई लिटिल सिंड्रोम इज आल्सो नोन एज सूडो हाइपर एल्डोस्टेरोनिज्म। तो हाइपर एल्डोस्टेरोनिज्म के क्या फीचर्स हैं, वी आर गोइंग टू हैव इंक्रीज इन सोडियम and we're going to have decrease in potassium. So hyponatremia and hypokalemia, along with that we're going to have hypertension as well. Okay, ठीक है, so sodium reabsorption by ENaC, potassium secretion by ROM and BK channels. Okay, let's move आगे. Okay, now we moved on to the diuretics. We've discussed, we're not going to discuss the diuretics, mainly pharma का portion है, but let's just observe water dynamics, कैसे कैसे हो रहा है, 60% water PCT, descending loop of Henle was permeable to water, 15% इसने reabsorb कर लिया, okay, ascending limb of Henle is impermeable to water, बात ही खत्म, DCT relatively impermeable to water, it's very close to the thick ascending limb, तो ऐसे मान लो कि उसी का ही वो brother है, very impermeable to water. What about the collecting duct? In the absence of ADH, collecting duct is also impermeable to water, but अगर ADH आएगा तो aquaporin 2 को वो insert कर देगा on the apical membrane, and that's going to lead to further reabsorption. That depends upon कि कितना आपका water loss है, कितना volume status of the patient, whether ADH is getting released or not. Okay, so aquaporins, let's revise. Aquaporin 1 का देखा descending limb of Henle में, which was water permeable. 2 हमारा favorite star, apical membrane of the collecting duct, ठीक है, very sensitive to ADH. Aquaporin 3 and 4 are basal membranes पे present है वहाँ पे, and that's pretty much it. यही पूछते हैं मेरे, ठीक है। So एक हमने mechanism, हमने जो hypokalemia का पढ़ा था, that was by ENaC. ENaC जो है whenever हम सोडियम reabsorb करने की कोशिश करते हैं via the DCT, तो क्या होएगा बेसिकली, ENaC के थ्रू हम सोडियम ज्यादा reabsorb करने की कोशिश करेंगे, in the process we release that potassium, ठीक है, because tubular lumen positive होता था, ROM के BK channels के थ्रू that potassium was getting lost, right, ऐसे बाहर की तरफ चला गया था। एक और मैकेनिज्म है इसका, यहाँ पे सम बुक्स में यहाँ पे लिखा है, तो व्हाट डू वी मीन बाय डाययूरेसिस, डाययूरेसिस मतलब वाटर इज गेटिंग लॉस्ट इन द यूरिन, अग्री, दैट इज डाययूरेसिस। सो मैकेनिज्म इसका ये है, whenever the flow rate of water it becomes more than 10% of normal, why will it become that, due to diuretics, चाहे वो कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेस इनहिबिटर्स हो, थायराइड्स हो, लूप कुछ भी, वाटर फ्लो रेट इंक्रीज हो गया, तो ये जो पोटेशियम चैनल है ना, बीके चैनल, ठीक है, इसका यहाँ पे एक फिलामेंट है, राइट, बीके चैनल का एक फिलामेंट है, whenever the water flow increases it pushes the filament and इसके कारण चैनल ओपन हो जाता है और उसके कारण हाइपोकलीमिया होएगा, तो ये भी एक रीजन है, ठीक है। ट्यूबुलर ल्यूमेन वाला रीजन भी ठीक है कि उसके थ्रू पोटेशियम लीक होता है, and via this mechanism as well, that is diuresis pushing the filament and that leads to opening of the ROMK of the BK channel, that is the maxi potassium channel, उसके थ्रू भी पोटेशियम लॉस हो सकता है, ठीक है, that's the main thing. Now the last type of cells which are present in the DCT, that is the intercalated cells. Okay, principal cells, intercalated cells हमने देख लिया, in the collecting duct, right, principal cells हो गए collecting duct के, and अपने intercalated cells हो गए collecting duct के, दो टाइप के intercalated cells हैं यहाँ पे, important alpha intercalated cells, okay, very important for your H positive excretion, यहाँ पे alpha intercalated cells are very important for acid base balance, जहाँ पे acid base balance बढ़ते हैं, alpha intercalated cells यहाँ पे important है, तो क्या कर रहे हैं alpha intercalated cells, they're going to secrete potassium, they're going to secrete H positive into the tubular lumen, acidify the urine via H positive ATPase, ठीक है, डायरेक्टली ATP यूज हो रहा है, और यहाँ पे एक और ट्रांसपोर्टर है, दैट इज H positive को जो बाहर फेंकते हैं, पोटेशियम को जो रीअब्सॉर्ब करता है, This is H positive, K positive exchanger. Okay, H positive, K positive exchanger, right? And यहाँ पे भी again carbon anhydrase 2 यहाँ पे भी है, which is going to generate that H positive. जो H positive हम वो बाहर excrete कर रहे हैं, and जो bicarb जो है अंदर की तरफ reabsorb हो रहा है, similar to your PCT. Why this is important? Important बहुत है यार. क्यों? Whenever we get hypokalemia, एक बहुत फिजियोलॉजी में है, हाइपोकलीमिया इज फॉलोड बाय मेटाबॉलिक एल्कलोसिस. पढ़ते रहते हैं हाइपोकलीमिया मेटाबॉलिक एल्कलोसिस, हाइपोकलीमिया मेटाबॉलिक एसिडोसिस. यही है यहाँ पे रीजन है. क्या रीजन है? व्हेनेवर वी हैव हाइपोकलीमिया, व्हाट डू वी नीड टू डू? हाइपोकलीमिया तो बहुत डेंजरस है, हमें पोटेशियम रीअब्सॉर्ब करना है. वी नीड टू रीअब्सॉर्ब पोटेशियम, नॉट सेक्रेट, वी नीड टू रीअब्सॉर्ब इट. तो रीअब्सॉर्ब कहाँ कर सकते हैं पोटेशियम को? NKCC2 के थ्रू कर सकते हैं यार, ट्रू, बट वी नीड मोर एज वेल. तो पोटेशियम रीअब्सॉर्प्शन इसके थ्रू कर सकते हैं, बट एट द कॉस्ट ऑफ H पॉजिटिव. H positive इतना लूज होने लग गया इन द ट्यूबुलर ल्यूमेन दैट pH of the blood it increases. मतलब metabolic alkalosis is occurring. So the dictum क्या है? Hypokalemia is going to be coupled with metabolic alkalosis and vice versa. Very important. Hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. Okay, so that's the main thing. So hypokalemia में metabolic alkalosis कैसे हो रहा है हमने ये देख लिया. सेकंड टाइप ऑफ चैनल जो है यहाँ पे जो ट्यूबुलर एपिथेलियल सेल्स है, दैट इज बीटा इंटीग्रेटेड सेल्स. इनका ज्यादा रोल नहीं है, मेनली इनका रोल इज फॉर सिक्रीशन ऑफ बेसिस, बाइकार्ब एक्सक्रीशन करना एंड रीअब्सॉर्बिंग क्लोराइड. ओके, ऑपोजिट सॉर्ट ऑफ बाइकार्ब एक्सक्रीशन करना एंड रीअब्सॉर्बिंग योर क्लोराइड. सो दैट इज द मेन थिंग ऑफ द डीसी ऑफ द कलेक्टिंग डक्ट. दीज वर द टू टाइप्स ऑफ कलेक्टिंग डक्ट. अभी हमने ग्लूकोज ट्रांसपोर्ट पढ़ा था, लेट्स जस्ट गो विद दैट. ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम कितना था ग्लूकोज ट्रांसपोर्ट का? 375 मिलीग्राम पर मिनट. ठीक है. थ्रेशोल्ड कितना था? थ्रेशोल्ड वाज अबाउट 180. डिफरेंस क्या? डिफरेंस को क्या कह दिया हमने? स्प्ले. सो दिस वाज द स्प्ले. सो द रीजन ऑफ स्प्ले क्या था? हेट्रोजेनिटी ऑफ द नेफ्रॉन्स. हर नेफ्रॉन एक तरह का नहीं है, कोई ज्यादा डिजीज है, कोई कम डिजीज है, किसका ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम ज्यादा है, किसका बहुत ही कम है, किसका एवरेज है, सबको मिला के 180 की हमारी वैल्यू मिल गई. 180 के ऊपर गया तो रीनल ग्लाइकोसूरिया होने लग जाएगा. ठीक है, ओके. सो दिस इज द डायग्राम दैट आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट, टेकन फ्रॉम गाइटन, इन विच वी हैव दिस पोर्शन दैट इज प्ले. ठीक है. थ्रेशोल्ड हमारा कहाँ पे है? यहाँ पे 180 है. ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम इज एट 300 कुछ या 375 जितना भी है. ऐसा होना तो ये चाहिए था कि हमारा एक्सक्रीशन सिर्फ तभी बढ़, एक्सक्रीशन जो है हमारा वो सिर्फ तभी बढ़ता है जहाँ पे हमारा TM आ जाता. पर एक्सक्रीशन कहाँ है? यहाँ आ रहा है. दिस इज द एक्चुअल थिंग दैट इज हैपनिंग. सो इसे क्या कहते हैं? हमने स्प्ले कहते हैं. ठीक है. यहाँ हम ऐसे कह सकते हैं उल्टा रीअब्सॉर्प्शन. रीअब्सॉर्प्शन तब तक चलना था जब तक हमारा ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम नहीं आना था, तब वो फिर पीक कर जाता, उससे पहले ही वो फ्लैटन हो गया. So these diagrams are depictive of splay. एक हमारा रीअब्सॉर्प्शन का कर्व है, एक हमारा एक्सक्रीशन का कर्व है. एक्सक्रीशन होना कब चाहिए था? TM पे होना चाहिए था. हो कब रहा है? थ्रेशोल्ड पे. क्यों? ड्यू टू स्प्ले. एंड रीअब्सॉर्प्शन हमारा तब तक चलना चाहिए था, कब तक? ट्रांसपोर्ट मैक्सिमम तक. पर हो कब रहा है? एट थ्रेशोल्ड. इसे हमने क्या कहते हैं? स्प्ले. सो दिस इज योर स्प्ले. ओके. सो PCT वी डिस्कस्ड अबाउट दैट एज वेल. वन MCQ, ग्लूकोज ट्रांसपोर्ट जो है SGLT2 इनहिबिटर है, फ्लोरोजन, fluorizin, right? Fluorizin, it competes with D-glucose for binding to the carrier, so fluorizin is an MCQ. Okay, so this is the stuff we are talking about. कि sodium water reabsorption हमने PCT से किया. Lupofenlay, we discussed about that. We discussed about collecting dark. We discussed about DCT and renal corpuscle हमने GFR, creatinine, pH वगैरह के बारे में तो discuss किया ही था. And this is sodium handling in the nephron per se. 65% PCT में, 25% thick ascending limb में, then at the DCT at the level, and then collecting duct के level पे as well. So everything is uploaded in the group, so you need not take any screenshots. It's already in the Telegram group as well. Okay, right. So दो चीजें हैं भैया, obligatory water absorption या facultative water absorption. Obligatory क्या है? जिसके बिना आप survive नहीं कर पाओगे. ठीक है. Almost 125 ml per minute हमारा GFR है. It amounts to 180 liters per minute. Plasma volume इतनी थोड़ी ना. तो the thing is सारे water को आपने reabsorb करना है. तो वो सारा reabsorption is obligatory water absorption. जब आपका वॉल्यूम स्टेटस कम है, देन यू मूव ऑन टू योर फैकल्टेटिव वाटर एब्जॉर्प्शन. ठीक है, कि फैकल्टेटिव वो इंक्रीज हो सकता है वाया ADH, राइट? तो प्रॉक्सिमिटी वो कितने? 20%. एंड मेनली दैट वाज वाया द कलेक्टिंग डक्ट वाया द aquaporin 2 acting on where? On the principal cells, aquaporin 2. ठीक है, and aquaporin 3 and 4 on the basolateral membrane. ठीक है, that is the main thing. So it is independent of ADH, and whereas this was dependent on your ADH. So this is the percentage of absorption. We have already discussed that as well. So this is हमारा obligatory urine volume. मतलब obligatory urine volume is the minimum amount of volume of urine that must be excreted to get rid of the body waste products. उसे हमें कहते हैं obligatory urine volume. ठीक है, all right. ठीक है. Now we move on to the mechanism of urine concentration. हम कैसे concentrate करें urine हमने देख लिया. Hyperosmolarity of the medulla maintained by the countercurrent mechanism and the urea recirculation. We're going to talk about that. And ADH के बारे में कि ADH कैसे करता है हमने already देख लिया कि ADH कैसे work करता है via V2 receptors present on the principal cells of the collecting duct, right? So countercurrent mechanism, तीन portions, thick ascending limb है, thin descending limb of the Henle's loop है, and the urea cycle. तो ये सारे जो है mainly हमारा जो thin ascending loop is not an essential part of your countercurrent multiplier, but it takes a role in countercurrent exchange, which was mainly facilitated by the vasa recta. Okay. So this is the steps that we follow usually. एक बार बस 2 मिनट लगेंगे. We'll just discuss over that. कि कैसे आता है कि जो हमारा वाटर है जो हमारा 300 मान लो 300 is the this is the experiment that we do to calculate how does it get created. So आज for the shortage of time we might not discuss that. Just follow it along in the slides. You're going to very easily understand कि via these processes how we can generate this tremendous amount of that medullary osmolarity that we have 1200 milliosmoles per kg. And जो maximum है in the animal kingdom per se, that is why kangaroo rats, ठीक है. तो they mainly say जितना आपका loop of Henle लंबा है उतना आप यूरिन कंसंट्रेट कर सकते हो. तो कंगारू रैट्स जो हैं दे मेनली लिव इन द डेजर्ट्स, राइट. तो वहाँ पे दे आर द मैक्सिमम अमाउंट ऑफ लेंथ ऑफ द लूप ऑफ Henle. सो व्हाट एंड यूरिया आल्सो प्लेज अ रोल, ठीक है. यूरिया रीअब्जॉर्प्शन वाया दीज यूरिया ट्रांसपोर्टर्स, यूरिया रिसाइक्लिंग हम जिसे कहते हैं, मतलब सम अमाउंट ऑफ यूरिया वाया द कलेक्टिंग डक्ट इज रीअब्जॉर्ब्ड into the interstitium so that it can maintain the osmolarity of the interstitium and plays a role in urine concentration. So that is urea recycling. Okay, you can remember the transporters. यहाँ पे collecting duct पे या UTA1 and UTA3 via जो circulation back into the tubular lumen via UTA2 है. So 1 and 3 here and 2 is right over here, right? So urea transport is also under the influence of ADH, and that देख रहे हो ADH कितना ज़्यादा water के लिए it is begging for it, right? It wants to reabsorb water at any cost, ADH. ठीक है, and we're going to see कैसे. एक हमने देख लिया aquaporin 2 के through. यहाँ पे we are seeing that urea transporter में जो mechanisms है ना UTA2, UTA1 and 3, that is also getting stimulated by ADH. ठीक है, and this is a vasa recta. We already discussed that. One question: why doesn't the blood flow in the medullary region wash the hyperosmolarity gradient? जो हमने यहाँ पे establish किया है, इतना ज़्यादा blood flow होना चाहिए कि सारा का सारा जो blood flow है इतना ज़्यादा हो. क्या है इतना ज़्यादा कि जिसके थ्रू सारा का सारा medullary osmotic जो gradient है वो सारा wash away हो जाए? ऐसा नहीं है. Why? Because medullary blood flow ही खुद कम है. Cortical blood flow is very sufficient, but medullary blood flow is very scanty. So that is one reason. And second reason is our vasa recta. कि vasa recta के through एक descending limb है, एक ascending limb है, it's coupled with your countercurrent multiplier and it's functioning as countercurrent exchange, right? And what are the factors affecting urine concentration? Let's see that. ADH, we discussed it. It can increase in the permeability of the DCT for water. We discussed that via your aquaporin 2, and we also saw for urea as well. Okay, length of the loop of Henle, kangaroo rat, jitna the loop of Henle, more effective in concentrating the urine. That is why newborns have a shorter loop of Henle, because the nephrons are still growing. That is the reason why they're less effective in concentrating urine. Okay, then we talked about the tuberoglobular feedback, that is delivery of salt to your ALH, that is the ascending loop of Henle. Uske through we discussed about that as well. Then we discuss even about the medullary blood flow कि जो ज़्यादा अगर है high medullary blood flow we should wash out the hyperosmolar gradient, जो कि ऐसा नहीं है, right? And urea recycling as well, which is again influenced by the ADH itself. Okay, so most of the section that the last topic that we are here is your nerve supply of the urinary bladder as well as the sphincters around it. This is the last topic, and then we'll be done with renal physiology. So यहाँ पे एक table है. This is what we are going to study. So दो system है. We have the somatic system and autonomic. Somatic is your voluntary control, and autonomic is basically autonomic, right? It functions on its own. Okay. Autonomic दो है, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is a part of your fight and flight response. उस time पे they basically want you not to micturate. Okay. So how does that happen? पहली बात तो autonomic जो nerves impulses हैं, they're also carrying pain sensations. One thing is that. So pain sensations are also being carried. Okay. जब हम बेसिकली मेंशन करते हैं तो जो ए डेल्टा टाइप ऑफ फाइबर्स है ना, दे आर बोथ ऑटोनॉमिक, दे कैन फंक्शन एज ऑटोनॉमिक एज वेल, एंड दे हैव पेन कैपेबिलिटी एज वेल. दैट इज व्हाई सिंपैथेटिक एंड पैरासिम्पैथेटिक नर्व फाइबर्स जो है ना, मेनली दे आर आल्सो द वन व्हिच कैरी पेन फाइबर्स. व्हाई? ड्यू टू ए डेल्टा. ठीक है, वो दोनों में होते हैं. तो एफ्रेन, सेंसेशन ऑफ पेन, एफ्रेन जा रहा है थ्रू द सिंपैथेटिक प्लेक्सस. सेम वाज फॉर द पेल्विक पैरासिम्पैथेटिक एज वेल. पैरासिम्पैथेटिक भी पेन सेंसेशन या ब्लैडर फुलनेस वगैरह भी मीडिएट करवा रहा है। थिंग इज ईफरेंट हमें स्टडी करना है मेनली। सिंपैथेटिक जो है बेसिकली इट इनहिबिट्स मिक्सचरेशन। हाउ कैन इट डू दैट? पहला, it's going to inhibit the detrusor. It's inhibitory to the detrusor via which? Via beta receptors, right? Beta 2 receptors. One thing is that, okay? Beta 3 receptors. Okay. Second thing, it is also motor to the internal urethral sphincter via alpha receptors, alpha 1 receptors, ठीक है, जिसे हम alpha 1 vasoselective drugs वगैरह भी देते हैं, तो alpha 1A या B and D, right? Alpha 1 receptors के through, right? And it is also motor to the seminal vesicle and the ejaculatory duct as well, ठीक है? तभी alpha blockers जो हैं they're mainly impotence के लिए they're responsible for that, okay? So तीन functions हो गए mainly inhibitory to the detrusor, contraction of the internal urethral sphincter and motor to the seminal vesicle and the ejaculatory duct. Okay. What about pelvic parasympathetic? Ejaculation maintained by sympathetic, right? Pelvic parasympathetic afferent तो sensation of bladder fullness, pain, reflex micturition वगैरह जो भी है वो pelvic parasympathetic हमारा control करता है. Efferent motor to the detrusor and it is your inhibitory to the internal urethral sphincter, which is exactly opposite to the sympathetic plexus. What about the pudendal? Pudendal is also going to convey the sensory information and motor control जो है basically यहाँ पे voluntary motor control, right? Paracentral lobule जो है हमारा that is a part of the frontal cortex, right? तो वहाँ पे paracentral lobule often involved in anterior cerebral artery infarction, ACA infarction पढ़ते हैं paracentral lobule. That is the highest center of your micturition. उसके बाद you have the pontine micturition centers and the pontine storage centers, which is this diagram. Let's see that. So this is the pontine paracentral lobule higher brain center है. ऐसे हमारा एक pontine micturition center होता है. Whenever we want to pee, micturition center activate हो जाता है और वो sympathetic and parasympathetic respectively के through control करता है हमारा micturition, right? And even pontine storage center, which is exactly the opposite. वो pudendal nerves के through function करेगा. These nerves, pudendal nerves. So they're going to motor contraction to the external urethral sphincter, which is under our control. It is under our control, right? Somatic control है यहाँ पे. ठीक है? That is why the pontine storage centers, ठीक है? Which is influenced by the paracentral lobule and which is further influenced by the limbic cortex की emotional urges वगैरह. You have something like social valence. Is it क्या surrounding ऐसी है कि जहाँ पे मैं I can pee or relieve myself? You have to see that as well ना. तो सारी चीजें are mainly integrated in the paracentral lobule, goes into the pontine micturition of the storage centers and later into the parasympathetic, sympathetic or the pudendal supply, and we've discussed that as well. Okay. All right. Right. So we'll be concluding our session आज. ठीक है, थोड़ा सा आज बड़ा हो गया. I was waiting for people to join, and I'm very thankful for anyone who is attending these lectures. And with that, we are mostly done with renal physiology. I would recommend that you go home and you study, you finish this up in 1 or 2 days and be done with renal physiology so that we can move on to the later on units. जो भी आगे का जो schedule है, we're going to update you on that very shortly. And let's continue physiology. Let's just be productive while we are at home, right? And thank you very much for everyone who is joining. Please give me a thumbs up if you like the session, right? Whoever is online. These sessions are obviously for your own reference. You can watch it at 2x speed, right? So they're all stored at the live section of our YouTube channel, so you can see them again. Even I see my videos sometimes again because like it's very easy to do that, you know? If someone is there. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer that. कोई समझ में ना आया हो, if you want me to repeat something or not, right? So we are almost done with this session, and again, thank you all for joining. So let me just conclude this, okay? And we'll see you in the next section. जब भी होगा, ठीक है? Whenever you guys feel like, we can have the next session. And let me just think on which unit do we have to start. कुछ important सी unit start करते हैं. Renal physiology पता है मुझे बहुत random सी unit आ गई बीच में, but I thought this is the least interconnected, I would say. किसी के साथ इसका ज़्यादा relation नहीं है. If you start with nerve muscle physiology, then you have to start with the other units in quick succession. Or I would say general physiology and then nerve muscle physiology. Very interrelated, है ना? So we're going to start that as soon as possible. Okay, and I hope these sessions are very useful to you guys as well. And I have a lot of fun making them for you, and I have a